So, whilst you've all been playing Baldur's Gate for the plot, I've been playing it for the wonderful architecture, obviously. So because of that, I've decided to make a tiny little small minuscule diorama of Auntie Ethel's tea house, mid-transformation. What could possibly go wrong? To get started on the build, we want to be semi-accurate for once, so I used the in-game camera and some Photoshop tomfoolery to piece together this template. My first mistake was that it's been many hours since I played this section of the game, and in my head I thought it was a simple box, a nice, quick, easy build. Well, if you've looked at the length of this video, you've probably realised that's not quite the case. I started cutting out a few layers of foam in the less than simple shape of the house and stacked them up. I tried to go with a scale that would equate to roughly 28mm, because I'm nothing if not an absolutely insufferable nerd. I used the doors to scale it, but that ended up making quite a sizable structure. I'm not making the inside of it because absolutely f that for a laugh, but you wouldn't have to make it solid if you're doing something similar. I just wanted it to be strong and to use up some of this pink foam that I don't like as much as the blue stuff. I threw some brown Mod Podge all over to seal in the foam and got to carving out spaces for doors and windows. Now you may have noticed that the tea house is made up of wooden boards, which nicely line up and scale to the thing that'll get me banned from every Starbucks in the UK, coffee stirring sticks. I find using a riffler tool works well to texture the sticks, but dear God, after this many your hands feel like you've just tried to have a cuddle with your friendly neighbourhood rabid porcupine. As you can see, I have a bit of a tendency to use too much tacky glue as I'm always concerned about things popping off. With this amount of tacky though, it'd make your mum's living room from 2006 look positively bland in comparison, so I will try to limit my usage as much as possible. I really cannot express how many of these little f***s I had to texture. I know you can see them on screen, but really I felt like I was going to end up in some sort of coffee stirring stick induced episode. And I promise I'll try to stop saying coffee stirring stick in this video. I'm already annoying myself. I did try to leave little gaps and uneven boards, making sure they looked a bit more hodgepodge than nicely aligned. Think like your mum's new decking when she roped your dad into doing it the first time to save money. Even then though, it still took bloody hours to texture and glue them all on, and I'm still finding bits of them in my house. I used more of those demonic cappuccino mixing planks to make doors and window shutters. At this point it really was dawning on me how much of this building was going to use these things. But hey, I'm trying to provide entertainment here, and usually to see this much wood you'd need to subscribe to OnlyFans. For the doors that are just open archways in the game, I improvised and made doors similar to the others. You might think, wow, those doors are looking a bit large, Lex. And the answer to that thought is, well, yes. The archway to this porch area is much bigger than the normal door size in the game, and where I put the handles really makes them look far too big. As I always say, scale is only a suggestion. Like I said at the start, I will be making half of this project look like the tea house with the illusion spell active. Nice, bright, covered in greenery, and the other half will look like the real gnarled tea house after the spell is broken, dark, dank and dead. But for now, the base of the structure stays mainly the same in both versions, so we don't need to decide where to split it just yet. To make the decks for the various entryways, I cut out some templates and used more caffeine agitating death sticks.
You want to buy some death sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
I don't want to sell you death sticks.
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life.
Yes, Obi-Wan, I too am rethinking my life right now. I used some foam to build up the area to the right height and hot glued them into place so that I can build up the rocks around them. It was about time to get based, so I stuck down the house with some glue I still don't know how to pronounce, and some hot glue for a quick hold. We also need a chimney, and here's one I made earlier. This is just some foam bricks left over from a previous project on a foam base grouted with wall filler. Next up, it was time to rock and roll. Eh? No? Okay. I used a mixture of plaster rock castings, foam and some real, actually from the outside rocks to build up some stone formations all around. In the game, half of the building is up against a big cliff pretty much, so I kinda just went off on one here and chose to do it this way. Much like The Rock, doing this task can get a little repetitive, so if you're mad enough to recreate this, stick at it. I actually quite enjoy the rock making process myself. I filled in all the gaps with Sculptamold. It naturally has quite a rocky texture, so I didn't smooth it out too much. Once your project starts looking like the tub of cottage cheese you might find at the back of your grand's fridge, in between one of those pineapple cheese hedgehogs from the 70s and some asbestos jam, you're about at the right consistency. In a much needed departure from espresso blending nightmare rods, we're going to use takeaway disposable chopsticks to make some support beams. Just need to easily cut through, rip them apart, and use a knife to weather and shape them. And oh boy, hope we didn't think that departure would be for too long, because the Devil's Latte whipping boards are back for both of these awnings. I made sure to leave plenty gaps and really weather the ends as they'd be pointing outwards. Using more chopsticks and evil macchiato combining strips to make these supports for the porch platforms, I secured everything with enough tacky and super glue to keep your dad from leaving to buy milk 14 years ago. Why so many parents-based jokes today? I need to speak to my therapist or something. For the roof, it's not super easy to see with the in-game camera, and I know you can get free camera mods, but I honestly don't trust myself to download things from questionable websites ever since the LimeWire incident of 2003. So I just sort of jammed the camera into things until I could get a good enough look to make it all up myself anyway. It seems to be kind of patchworked together sections covered by wooden for sake. Okay, wow. Let's just get through this, okay? I textured more awful Americano incorporating batons and began the process of covering the roof. Again, making sure nothing was too neat and any gaps would just show the brown Mod Podge underneath. Look, I already have to sleep like I'm about to snap half of the world's population because of my carpal tunnel hand brace, so let's just magic ourselves out of this corner and all done. Let's move on, shall we, before I have a conniption. Things were looking a little too crispy and white, like JT's 90s noodle hair, so it's about time to get some paint down. I mixed grey paint and more Mod Podge to act as both a base layer and a sealer for the rocks. Mod Podge really is the MVP of all crafting. I foolishly shunned Mr. Podge in the past, thinking of him as nothing more than fancy PVA, but alas, I was mistaken. He truly is a god among adhesives. So, although finishing the coffee stirring stick hell that I've been through with this thing makes me happier than seeing the looks on your party members' faces when you say, I cast Fireball, it does mean that I have to make a decision. Because I've decided to make this thing 10 times more complicated than it needed to be by making a diorama half pre and half post transformation, then I need to decide where to split it. My original instinct was to split it right down the middle through the front door, but that might lose the opportunity to do as many details on one of the halves because, I mean, this side over here is pretty plain, honestly. It's up against a rock face in the game, so there's really not much to it, whereas this is where all the action is. So do I do it diagonally through this way so that there's kind of a door on each side, a bit more to play with? I don't know. What I do know is that I should have figured that out by now. Definitely before I put it on the base so it could be more intentional. But hey, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, and I guess we gotta figure that out. Our first step in differentiating our halves is to paint the wood. And if anyone from the UK is watching, you'll recognise these as those goo pots none of us millennials can bear to throw away for some reason. They are perfect for washes though. I made a lighter, warmer brown for the illusion side, and a duller, greyer black brown for the real side. I tried to maintain a fairly equal line down the middle of the building. After that was dry, I moved on to one of my favourite parts of the process, dry brushing. I used quite light browns and greys to do the dry brushing on either side, and added a little bit of green to the dead side of the building to really help sell the look of it being old, mouldy, decayed, and about as dry as those cups of lemonade from the Scottish Willy Wonka experience. Truly the best thing this country's ever given the world, and you are welcome. Whilst that dries, it was time to get back to the rocks. Stone tends to have a lot of different undertones, and the ones in Baldur's Gate 3 are no different. So I mixed up a range of fairly brightly coloured washes. And don't worry, I'm not about to take this thing to a rave and end up having a 3-hour debate about nihilism and the price of bread in the 70s with a bottle of balsamic vinegar. The colours are just this bright because they'll be toned way down by the washes later. He was nice actually, taxi driver from Sheffield, called Martin. Goes well with tomatoes. I've never been to a rave in my life. Dabbing off the excess, I made sure to let some of the colours get to know each other and mix a little for extra variation. Then after some more drying time, I could cover the whole rocky surface with the darker wash to bring everything together. On the illusion side I used black and brown washes, whilst on the real side I just used black. It's a subtle difference, but it does enough to show that they aren't the same. Then after that we're back to our holy grail of dry brushing. It's the most satisfying part by far and really brings out all of the details. I don't even really need to be talking right now. I'm just dragging this out because I wanted to shoehorn in more cool dry brushing shots. Next up was thatching the roof. I've seen some other crafters use static grass before, so I modified my static grass applicator to be able to handle much longer, more roof appropriate lengths of grass. And, okay look, hindsight Lex is here to say, don't do this. What you see here is me thinking I'm f***ing MacGyver. When I brushed on some extremely questionable looking PVA glue and turned on the applicator, it looks like it needs to end its subscription to Rogaine and just get the razor out. But rather than heed that advice, I chose denial, tried to cling on to those strands, brush it into a discreet comb over, and just valiantly carry on. But at 3 AM, after covering the whole roof, and in a panic before the glue dried, I scraped it all off. So I guess I f***ed that one up, didn't I? They really should make it clearer that you're supposed to follow the instructions, because how was I supposed to know not to do that? But anyway, I guess I'll just have to do how they did in the old days and actually thatch the roof. Piece by piece, over the course of probably many hours. The thing I didn't want to do in the first place. So I relented and bought some coconut fibre online. You can still kind of see the aftermath of the previous attempt here, as I wasn't able to get it all off. But in my mind, that's just some extra texture, and I won't hear any more about it. I cut the fibres down into shorter lengths and started gluing them onto the roof, dripping in some watered down Mod Podge over each section to grab the fibres that weren't fully flush to the roof. This thankfully didn't take quite as long as I thought it would, and as such is just what I should have done from the beginning. I think it actually looks much better than the static grass would have, and much more in scale. Do you ever just get an idea into your head of how you think something should be done and stick to it even when it's clearly not working? Yeah, me neither. I glued everything down whilst on a Discord call with my lovely friends, and it was really starting to come together. And whilst I do this self-explanatory part, it's probably a good time to mention I have a Patreon. I know, self-promo time, but I do really appreciate the support and I'm really excited to do more with it in the future. The link will be in the description and it would mean the world to me if you could check it out. I gave it a dry brush and some washes off camera to differentiate the two sides and make the real side look older, greyer, dustier and drier. Like Nosferatu playing a copy of E.T. the Extraterrestrial from that burial in the desert. Not only is this a tea house, but also a tree house, meaning we need to make some trees. I made the armature with strong wire and aluminium foil for the base, and some thinner wire for branches to get a general shape. I think every crafter has one or two things they just don't like making. For me, I don't really like making windows, and I really don't like making trees. I am a walking contradiction though, and despite this fact I do play a Sylvaneth army, and I've been procrastinating on making my own Awakened Wildwoods for years, because I refuse to pay Games Workshop over £100 for these things. So I guess it's as good a time as any to try and refine my tree skills to probably still never get around to making them. With the hot glue gun I coated the armature and used the hot end to get some general shapes. Then with a wood burning tool on the lowest setting I scribed in some bark texture. I find that most tree making methods just don't look as good as I want them to. And though I'm far from a stickler for realism, I have yet to find a method I'm fully happy with. But this is probably the best one I've tried so far. For some of the thinner roots and vines, I made them out of green stuff. This green stuff is so old it needs to be carbon dated, which makes it a bit of a nightmare to work with. But I refuse to get rid of it because it's not cheap. So I suffered through using this roll maker to get some quick details and left them to sit. After many more hours of work, I had just a couple of trees and branches ready for the diorama, and I was semi-happy with how they turned out. You'll be quickly learning I only really have one painting technique, which consists of base colour, heavier dry brush, wash, then light dry brush again. And I really have no defence. Painting is the area I'm probably least skilled in, but this method usually works out pretty decently for most things. Getting these stuck to the project was a bit fiddly. I used pretty strong wire, so it did want to spring back and take my eye out if I so much as moved a single pore on my finger while holding it in place to dry. But with a mix of hot glue, CA glue, and unbridled Scottish rage, I managed to wrangle the branches into submission. Although I wasn't focused on exact accuracy, I did sometimes open up the game for reference, and only occasionally got distracted.
There is nothing I'd like more.
Let's move on. For the illusion side, we need some foliage, and this part of the tree making process is where I tend to find a lot of the methods I'd copied from the internet in the past just fell a bit short. So I tried something a bit different and firstly glued down some pieces of lichen. I'm still not sure that's how you pronounce it, but honestly, I'm from Scotland and we struggle saying the word girl like a human being, so I wouldn't take pronunciation advice from me on a good day. Girl. Girl. That one. Once the lichen was dry, I dripped on some watered down Mod Podge and sprinkled on a couple coats of fine blended turf. I went over each section a couple of times to make sure I got a good coverage, and sealed everything in with more of the Mod Podge water. I must say, I do quite like this method, and I may continue using it in future the next time I decide to make something covered in the one thing I don't like making, which will probably be the next time I make anything, knowing me. I used that same flocking mix to add a nice healthy dose of greenery to all the rocks and high points on the illusion side. As for the gnarled side, I used some crunchy straw scatter in a similar fashion. For even more of a lush environment on the nice side, I stretched out some of this foliage mat and sprayed liberally with Mod Podge water to hold it in place while it dried. I think this really started to pull everything together. On the dry side, I used some of these climbing vines, which are honestly a bit of a nightmare to work with. They don't stay put, and because any glue you use will be visible, it limits what you can do to keep it in place as it dries. If you keep it on more horizontal surfaces or areas you can tuck it into, then it does work okay. After you've ripped off 5 times and called it a f***ing face, that is. I chopped some beads in half and painted them up as door handles, and I even added some to this side door to help with the scale. I don't know how much it helped versus just looking like 2 sets of doorknobs, but I guess the only real knob here is me for f***ing it up so badly in the first place. So let's just move on, shall we? It was then time to use the static grass applicator correctly. I even bought the actual correct glue this time, instead of whatever secretions Amazon sent me before. And can you believe that when you follow the instructions, things actually work out? I've always been a bit more of a give it a bash and figure it out myself kind of a gal, but this time I will relent and say, yes, okay, maybe read the instructions a little bit. With brighter green for the nice half and some patchy brown grass for the real side, it was starting to look pretty good. I even added some bushes around the nice half of this tree. Getting to the home stretch, it was time to make some accessories. And you may be wondering, Lex, aren't those things on screen looking an awful lot like... Hold on. Come on, Lungo mingling cudgels? Well, you must be mistaken, because there's simply no way I'm still texturing these things months later. I used those mysterious artifacts and some toothpicks to make the sign next to the front door, before realising that, well, there needs to be a way up to the sign, doesn't there? There needs to be some... wooden steps. Sweet So I made some stairs. 2 sets of them, all weathered and carved and textured individually, and I painted them up with the same method as before. I mixed up a dirty paste of paint, sand and Mod Podge to brush onto the areas that would gather a build-up over time, and to fill in some of the more unsightly gaps at the bottom of this wall. Then I was able to glue the sign and steps into place. Next up was the bunting, which isn't just probably the name of a very posh child, but also the string of flags we can see on the illusion side of the building. I didn't have the right colours of cloth, so using some watered down paint I dyed some old t-shirt fabric to match the game. Once dry, I cut the fabric into tiny little triangles, and with a bit of glue and a bit of magic, ended up with a few lengths of bunting that I could coat in Mod Podge to seal and keep in the right position. I prefer everything to be fixed in place, because I'm a control freak. There's no joke there, really. Just that. To make the bone bowl for what is probably quite a traumatising evening of trick-or-treating, I thought I could use something from my bits box. I've been saving some cool bits over the years. Oh yeah, this is a cool one. That is a Kinder Egg. I know they've been banned in America. Okay, yes. So yes, I found this measuring spoon, which was about the right bowl shape. I snipped off the handle with my sprue cutters that I definitely shouldn't be using to do this, and sanded down the edge. I made these years ago as teeth for a larger scale monster sculpture, and with a bit of super glue it's starting to take shape. After a Wraithbone Prime, I painted the bowl itself black and the bony parts with Citadel's skeleton horde. Now what's a nice porch without somewhere to sit and admire the bloodshed during any upcoming disturbances? No spoilers. Using some mat board, cocktail sticks, and the broken pieces of my mortal enemies, I made these tables. I painted them up and then dipped some red fabric in Mod Podge to drape on as tablecloths. I made some tiny little cups from these things. Grommets, I think they might be called, but honestly that could be me thinking about cheese too much, so jury's still out on that one.
No cheese, grommet.
I stained some tiny pieces of paper to act as the notes you can find in the game, which is the most attention to accuracy you're likely to find on this channel. And I even made the little toad teapot. Don't focus on it too much though, as it's probably the worst bit of sculpting I've ever done. I rushed through it because I was just so done at this point, but it's the thought that counts. To match the tables, I made some chairs with more cocktail sticks and some pieces of balsa wood. To get the viney look they have in the game, I first made a lip of thicker wire for the back and then wrapped thin wire messily around the whole thing, securing with super glue, and gave that a paint as well. I grabbed some GW skulls I had on hand for the door area and gave them the skeleton horde treatment, followed by some wildwood for the horns, to match the look of this incredibly horny game. I chose some wooden beads from my bits box and off camera stuck them together, closed up one end with green stuff and painted them to be hanging vases. I used a little piece of twine to hang them with and then struggled to stuff these quite delicate foliage clusters in there. Once they were in though, I painted some flowers on them in pink and yellow, and whilst I had the paints out, I did the same to these flower boxes that I made off camera. Just don't ask me what they're made from. There is no better feeling during a project than when you start gluing the final touches down. It's all coming together, starts getting recognisable as what it's supposed to be, and most importantly, the finish line is in sight. Off camera, I made a ladder for the back door out of you-know-whats and twine, and to finish off the bone bowl, I added some, well, bones, and of course a friend to keep them company. The front door is pretty packed with details, so for these guys I used more green stuff and twine stuck with lots of CA glue. Again, I tried to keep things fairly messy, as this is our real side of the building, and I wanted it to look like these had been added over a long period of time. I arranged the skulls semi-accurately and semi-just where I wanted to put them. Although I pre-painted everything before gluing them on the project, I realised that they were a bit too brown in comparison to the very grey side of the building, so I toned them back down and made them blend in a bit better. I used more of the very fiddly vines and prayed to the crafting gods that they would actually stay on there. And for once, it seems to have worked. They stuck on with just a little bit of rageful poking and are looking pretty good. I then moved on to some final flocking, scattering tiny leaves all around the area, concentrating them in places they would naturally gather, and added some of these bigger ones for variety. And once they were down, I was ready to give it all a liberal dousing with our old pal Mod Podge water. I didn't have another one in me, but I am here to say that it's finished. It's finally done, and I am so happy. I just didn't expect it to grow arms and legs in the way that it has done. Not literally, obviously, but it did take months, and now it's all over. And thank you for sticking around through this whole video. I know it's probably a bit of a long one, and I really appreciate the likes and subscribes, shares, checking out my Patreon. It all means the world to me too. But I guess I've held off on the final shots long enough. So without further ado, here's one I made earlier. Now, where the f*** do I keep this thing in my house?